So here's your new overheating computer. So it's finally time to put together my X, a PC, and the funny thing is, this is probably going to be some of the best price performance that used PC parts has ever seen here, even on the channel. And I just finished picking up my son a Ryzen 7 1700 build with a GTX 980. And if you haven't seen that, I'll put the link up here, where we built him an absolutely amazing PC, not just for the money, but also in terms of overall performance and the fact that it could play games absolutely no problems at 1080p with high and ultra settings. But today we hope to replicate that and come pretty close in performance, but coming in at nearly half the price, where we've got an RX 580 8GB, which we got for $90 roughly in a deals hunt. If you haven't seen that, I'll put the link up here. And also, we've got an X79 motherboard that we got for 45 bucks, a 6-core Xeon Sandy Bridge for $5, and 16GB of RAM for around 35 bucks. We've got a CPU cooler that we've still got to somehow manage to rig to this X79 board. And there's another factor at play where this build might not even be able to get finished if we can't update the BIOS on this motherboard, or if the motherboard has a problem other than it needs more than just a BIOS update, because in the previous parts hunt, we got a B2 error code when we were trying to boot with the RX 580. So from here on in, we're going to try and mount this cooler to this motherboard and also patch up the BIOS. Two factors which are crucial if this build is to succeed. And in terms of the prices that we paid for these parts and what this build comes to, I'll put the link up here. And there's still another factor after that, and that is we're using a $5 Dell XPS Studio case, which needs some big tech yes loving, and I don't have my usual tools since I'm all the way here in Japan. So let's do the best we can and see what we can come up with. So we got some really bad news here, and this is this motherboard that we tried testing everything out on, and although it booted with the old school graphics card, the 9600 GT, it ended up in the end having such a weird problem that I'm really baffled. I've never seen this before actually. And so what happened was we started downloading the BIOS update through the MSI website, where it's an application, and then it says put it on a pen drive, and we've tried to boot that via DOS, FreeDOS, where you boot it up from DOS. Also tried it in Windows under command prompt as administrator, just didn't work. And then I tried a tool from MSI's forums where it was called MSI Flash Headquarters, and you download this tool from the people who made it, and that was supposedly meant to work. But when that didn't work, I started getting suspicious of something else happening. And what that program actually ended up doing though was turning that application into a bin file, which a program, a free utility called AfuDOS, which is an independent flashing utility which you can boot into DOS from. We ended up using that, and what happened was it finally gave us out the real reason why this couldn't accept a BIOS update, and that was the BIOS itself has been write protected from the actual hardware. And so whoever did this would have had to have manually done this when they implemented this BIOS. So it's very frustrating that an X79 motherboard from a maker like MSI has not only a write protected BIOS on it, but no option within the BIOS itself to update the BIOS. So that's the two problems that we're facing here, and it just really adds up to the fact that I can't do a whole lot with this motherboard, unfortunately, until I get back to Australia, where I'll have to use an external flashing ROM like the one I've used in previous Can Yes Fix It's, or I'll have to get something to connect to this JSP1 jumper here, which is actually an external flashing jumper for the BIOS. So why they've done this is really beyond me. It's so bizarre for an X79 motherboard with a UEFI BIOS to have this sort of problems. So everything is fine with this board and it can potentially work fine in a gaming PC if it has that BIOS update where it can support the new graphics cards via, I think, CSM or whatever method they're going to use. But unfortunately it's been write protected. And the craziest thing is, after that, I even tried to hook up a wire from the 3rd pin to the 8th pin on the BIOS itself to try and disable the write protection, but that unfortunately did not work either. It didn't take it. So going to have to manually take this one back to Australia. And as far as the PC is concerned, I really don't know what I'm going to do now. There's only one last resort, because I actually ended up drilling out the holes on the cooler and fitting the cooler as well. So everything was ready to go. It was just unfortunate that I'm overseas and I don't have enough tools on hand to try and fix this properly. And even then, even if I have the proper tools, you may have to actually desolder this chip completely and put on a new BIOS, which is really difficult, really time consuming for what it is. So we now got back with this $20 board, and the good news is that it's booting up, and it's booting up well with the CPU and also the RAM installed. The CPU temperature is getting a little bit hot. I haven't used any thermal paste yet because I don't have much to work with, but what I'm going to do now is try and update the BIOS just like the X79 board, because I believe there is a beta BIOS on the website that improves the PCIe compatibility, and I'm guessing that's probably the reason this board got hocked as well, just like the X79 board, because people try to install newer graphics cards in them and they just wouldn't take. So fingers crossed this works. So after that BIOS update, it is now taking the newer graphics cards like the RX 580. So this build is finally going to be able to work, except it's finally time now to do what I've always wanted to do with that $5 case, and that is some tech yes lovin'. That's essentially where we're gonna take this old case, clean it up, and make it look as schmick and brand new as possible. Here's a secret star of the show in today's video. This was something we picked off the shelves at Kind's home. It was about $2 a can, and it sort of is a WD-40 copy, except one really impressive thing about this spray was the actual pressure coming outside of it. This doubled down as kind of like a data vac and something that lubricated and made the whole build look really shiny and like new. I was really impressed with this one. I just tried it out, luck of the draw, and then when I started spraying it, I was like, wow, this stuff is doing the Tech Yes Lovin' 2-in-1, which really makes it a 3-in-1 since you're saving that time as well. Oil spray.
Oil spray.
So we have now completed the XPS Studio with the 2600K, 8GB of RAM, and the RX 580. Now, one thing to be very careful of when you are building in this case, or actually any Dell case for that matter, is sharp edges. I learnt this the hard way last year when I was working on an Alienware case. This case is the same. It has some really sharp edges inside, so I took my time with the Tech Yes Loving, and it did come up pretty well. I mean, this case is certainly a good looking case for being around 10 years old, I think, and it's got a lot of USB front outs, also a memory card reader, even though that's USB 2 speeds. But one thing as well is the fan at the back is actually quite loud. So I'm going to do some experimenting with that rear fan and the front fan. Since this case is actually really big, you may be able to get away with either putting a noise insulator in or simply just unplugging the two fans altogether. So we've come into a couple of problems already, and that is the memory only goes on this motherboard to 1333 megahertz max. And our cooler is not contacting the CPU properly, clearly by these temperatures. They're just way too high. When I first saw them in the BIOS, I thought, okay, maybe just a one-off thing, but running a stress test, it immediately throttles, which means that the CPU is not connecting properly, which is weird because it seems to mount absolutely fine. So I'm gonna have to figure out what I can do. So here's your new overheating computer.
Looks good. What's up?
Well, no, I fixed it. So after a little bit of stress testing, this motherboard will only take even a 2600K to 3.5 gigahertz. And it's a little bit weird since it did say in the BIOS that it would take it to 3.8. However, the temperatures are well under control now, floating around 70 degrees. So the cooler with its fan finally working is looking like it'll do a good job. So now it's time to get some benchmarks running and see how it performs against the PC that I built for my son recently. So there's all the benchmarks done with this PC, the XPS Studio, that is now finally complete and working absolutely fine. And the amount of headaches I had to get this thing running was mainly to do with that X79 motherboard that we picked up, and it had that really unexpected error. But once we got this H67M board updated with the BIOS, albeit it was a weird method through Windows, I don't know what it was around this error and updating your BIOS via Windows, but did work out in this case, and we did get the RX 580 working, which when we tested it in games, we had even the side panel on here with both those fans turned off, the loud ones, and that's what I've got at the moment, so it's actually not that loud, we only got temperatures that were still hovering below 70 degrees on the GPU, and with the CPU it was hovering below 80 degrees, so I was happy with these temperatures considering it is hot and considering we've got the best case scenario for noise. Now, another thing with the gameplay itself, it was really smooth after we disabled that meltdown patch. Then I noticed the gameplay was a lot more smoother and the stuttering wasn't really there, and the FPS in Fortnite was epic settings, 1080p, was coming pretty close to that of the PC that I built for my son. The Heaven benchmark was well in favor of the previous PC, and also the Firestrike score, the physics on the Ryzen 7 1700 was well above that of the 2600K, but the GPU score between the RX 580 and also the GTX 980 on both these systems was pretty close, and then the Time Spy, of course, going slightly towards the GTX 980. So with this system here, we've got something that performs really good and doesn't break the bank at all. But one thing to note is that there is practically no upgrade path since we've put in that 2600K and we can't get any more out of the memory, and we've only got 2 DIMMs there, which is already populated with 2 4GB sticks. So what we've got here is a Tech Yes banger that comes in with phenomenal price performance, but of course doesn't have a whole lot of upgradability. Now the funny thing is with that X79 motherboard and also the CPU and the cooler is that I wish that did work out, because that would have had quad channel DDR3 memory, which would have helped a little bit, and I'm sure we could have got that to the XMP profiles, and also as well maybe extracted some extra performance out of that 6-core, but that wasn't meant to be, so I'm probably going to take that home with me and see if I can manually update that BIOS. But the funny thing about that CPU, that cooler, and also that motherboard combo was it came in at a very similar price point as the 2600K and that motherboard and that cooler, once we factored away that we took out 8GB of RAM as well. So pretty similar prices. I'll put the 2 builds on how much they both cost up on the screen here with the variation for you guys. But in terms of that X79 motherboard, it may make an appearance in the future here at Tech Yes City, and if it doesn't, well then I guess it failed. Anyway, when all's said and done, my son now has an awesome PC, my ex has a PC as well, so they're both going to be happy. And me stopping off on Japan before I have to head on to Korea, it's been an absolute blast. I've somehow managed to balance out time on YouTube and my son and make it work, and I look forward to giving you guys the next chapter where we're going to be doing a used parts hunt in Korea, so stay tuned for that. And now it's time for the question of the day, which comes from Zura YT, and he says, wait, you speak Japanese? And はい、日本語話しますよ。結構長い間話してないから多分全部忘れたよ。So basically, I do speak Japanese. It's a conversational level. I can't really read the kanji too well, but I can definitely speak enough to live here every day, go deals hunting, talk with people on a regular basis, basically get everything I need and want to do in Japan. But on that same token, when it comes to talking, I can talk to people, but when it comes to reading, I'm really terrible at reading Japanese. So hopefully that answers that question for you guys. And also, with all that out of the way, do let us know in the comments section below, which PC of the 2 did you like better? This one that we built here for just over $200, or that one that I built for my son? Or would you mix and match components? And if so, what and why? Love reading your thoughts as always. And if you want to see the content the moment it drops, subscription button's down there, ring the bell, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Peace out for now. Bye.
Today I'm going to be building my ex-wife a PC so she can get work done. And what do you have to say about this?
Yeah. Nani suru no? What are you gonna do?
Okay, so today we're going to build you a new PC.
Yeah?
Well, today we're going to build you a computer. And are you going to be happy about this computer?